Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching this. I hope you're all having a good day, and I hope that I will be able to see you all in class during the next class period. And I hope that this is helpful as you're getting ready to write your research paper. Today, we're going to talk about pathos, logos, ethos. We're going to talk about Code Girls and how the author of Code Girls uses pathos, logos, and ethos. And I hope that this helps you as you do research and write your paper. A couple of caveats. I stole all the images from the web for educational purposes. Unless otherwise indicated, the page numbers refer to Everything's an Argument with Readings, the 8th edition, and this is not a formal paper. So be sure to cite your sources better than I did. Follow the MLA format for class, please. I always try to do a bit of why bother and try to explain why I'm doing some of the things that I'm doing. If you look at your syllabus under the student learning outcomes, students will understand the appropriate use of the emotional, logical, and ethical appeals in argumentation. So, emotional, logical, and ethical are pathos, ethos, and logos. Not necessarily in the same order, but that's what we're going to be talking about. So, this is an effort to give you an overview about using emotional, logical, and ethical appeals as you are making your arguments. And again, please remember everything's an argument is one of the ground rules of this class. It's not just a textbook I used a couple of classes ago. Pathos is the appeal to the emotions. You can take a look at it and you can see that it has some of the same roots as the words pathetic, but how it is not, however, just an appeal to get people to cry. It's an appeal to the emotions. The photo you see on the page, or the Norman Rockwell painting that you see on the page, is an effort to look at the nostalgia, to look at some times past, to think about family, to think about the emotions associated with family, all of those things. And you see pride, you see laughter, you see people, enjoying each other's company. All of those things are emotions that can be appealed to in writing. For you as a writer, you're going to use emotions to connect with your readers. You want to assure your readers that you understand their experiences. And again, if you take a look at the emojis, all sorts of emotions can be connected to. I think it's important to understand if we're going to deal with emotional appeals properly, you want to think about how you want readers to feel, but you're not trying to jerk their emotions. You're not trying to get them to cry or laugh or whatever just because. The emotional appeal is to get them to come over to your side, but you're not playing a puppet master. You're thinking about what do you want them to do? What do you want them to think? How do you want these emotional appeals to get people to come follow your point of view? If you look at Code Girls, you as college students are thinking about the idea of privacy, thinking about how life would be in your rooms, and she talks about this idea that you all of a sudden have people stringing quilts across their rooms, you have people keeping secrets from their roommates, and you want to think about how is that going to affect the relationships you might have with the other people in your room. It's certainly something to think about for you as a college student. There are a lot of spots where I think they want you to think about what must have it been like for women in that time, women in 1940s versus women in 2023. 1940s, one job consistently available to women with a fine education, school teacher. I think it's important to understand that hopefully this makes everybody just a little angry, everybody kind of going, how could that ever have been? and understanding that, that's less than 100 years ago. We're not talking about ancient Rome. We're not talking about, you know, the pilgrims. We're talking about the 1940s in the United States. Again, the idea that there's a place with no female math teachers, perhaps this is even an appeal to those of you growing up in South Dakota. Uh, the Sioux Falls Argus Leader a couple of days ago had some articles about teacher shortages within the state, but the idea that women were not encouraged to study math, the fact that there are no math teachers at all who were female in some parts of the country, again, should be an appeal to the emotions, appeal to get people a little angry, an appeal to get people thinking, why could this have happened? How could this have happened? If I look at the next thing, the idea that of how women were treated, they're being asked to come save the country. They're being asked to break all of these codes that the Japanese had, that the Nazis had. And yet, we are going to wonder what the women looked like, and that, we're going to grace the office, the naval offices, with these large scale photographs because the women are attractive. It's, and we want women who are well connected socially. Again, this is, I think, a couple of things. It's an appeal to emotional, why does it matter what they look like if they're intelligent enough to break codes? But it's also using the emotions to remind us as readers that this book is set in a different time, that this nonfiction is set at a time that's far different than the world we're living in now. And again, just the idea that, almost everybody thought we were nothing but secretaries, and that it was all too easy to convince an inquiring stranger that the work she did was menial, or that she existed as a plaything for the men she worked for. And that's it. The idea that, again, they were brought in for their intelligence, they were given all of these tests to prove that they were intelligent, but they were supposed to keep showing that they were nothing more than a plaything, that they were just secretaries, you know, typing letters, I think is an important reminder. And again, it should appeal to the emotions. It should make us wonder, you know, are we still that way? Is Are there still bodies of, places where things are still that way, whether it's the workplace or whatever? And so I think these examples appeal to the emotions, appeal to our 2023 emotions, and in doing so, remind us that we may have come a long way, but perhaps there's still a long way to go in treating everyone equally. And then I'm not sure if this is the last one or not, but again, it was not easy being a smart girl in the 1940s. People thought you were annoying. By way of, weird tangent, I watched a review of the HBO Max uh, series Velma, where the smart girl is annoying. And it seems to be something that we haven't gotten beyond yet. And again, I think this is an appeal to emotions, especially people who would be reading this book, especially women who would be reading this book, who take pride in their intellect and might identify emotionally with the idea that maybe people in 2023 still think that smart women are annoying. Ethos. Ethos is an appeal to the speaker's or writer's credibility. Looking professional, sounding professional, all of those things are part of one's ethos. People look at the sender of the message and attempt to determine whether the sender is credible. The cartoon slide here. People are going to look at Jessica Rabbit far differently than they're going to look at, some of the other characters on the screen here. People are going to look at Aladdin far differently than they're going to look at some of the other characters on the screen here. And so as you go through, remember that the sender is part of the message. The medium, in this case, the author, is part of the message. Okay, credibility includes integrity, credibility includes expertise. When we're going to Code Girls, I think it's important to understand that she tries to establish expertise, and ethos is gained through identification with one's audience and one's era. All of those emotional appeals that we talked about in the previous slide were an effort to appeal to the 2023 audience, or 2017, 2018, whenever the book came out, audience. It's an appeal to this era now, saying, look what it was like back then. Also, I think it's an idea where she is attempting to say, you can trust me. I know what I'm doing. I have established some expertise. If you look at the second thing on this slide, does the person or group have authority to speak on this issue? Does she, the author of this book, have the authority to tell us about the Code Girls? How did she get that authority? What did she do to make us believe that she's an authority? And also, the second thing on the page, the bottom line here, I think it's important that all of you remember that your audience is always going to say, what's your motive? And your audience is always going to say, what's in it for me? If you look here, the audiences have every right to ask about the speaker's authority. What gives them the authority to talk about the particular subject matter? And you can have different kinds of authority. You can have degrees, you can have a number of years in the field, you can have won awards for something. There's lots of ways where you have the credentials to say you're an authority. Mundy talks about, she wrote this book over several years. She drew from large archival collections of documents produced by the U.S. Army and U.S. Navy code-breaking units. She went to the National Archives. She went through the boxes that had memos, internal histories, reports, minutes, rosters, everything. She also interviewed more than 20 surviving code breakers, and she located them through the NSA. She located them through family members. She placed notices on websites. She went through, again, the National Archives Personal Records Facility in St. Louis. She did all of these things to gain the knowledge to prove to us that she is qualified to write this book, that what she is saying in this book should be considered authoritative because she took the time to become an authority. As we talk about expertise, I think there are 3 caveats. Number 1, make sure the person claiming expertise is an expert. I don't want my mechanic to cook my food. I don't want my cook to give me medical advice. And I don't want a teacher to prescribe drugs. All right? And I don't want my druggist to fix my car. Make sure that your expert is an expert in the field. Number 2, I don't think we should take everybody at face value just because they're an expert. However, I do think that there is sort of an attack on the ethos of experts. People who have deep knowledge about a subject are being questioned just because they say things that don't agree with somebody's political beliefs. And I think it's important to understand that we should not be looking for people we agree with. We should be looking for people who know what they're talking about. And again, I've said this in class several times and I'll keep repeating it. The fact that well educated people with deep experience are frequently wrong does not mean that poorly educated people with little experience are frequently correct. In fact, it means that they're probably more frequently wrong than the experts. You don't have college degrees yet. You're working to get them. However, you have personal experience about your subject that can allow you to at least start asking questions. If you've traveled to a particular region, if you are a cancer survivor, you can certainly write about medical treatment of cancer in ways that I can't and that I don't understand because even if I try to research it, because I haven't experienced it. For you as a writer to establish ethos, I think number one, respect the audience, establish common ground. It's what Mundy tried to do with all of the ethical, or excuse me, with all the emotional appeals that we talked about in the first section of this slideshow. Demonstrate that you know your topic and be clear about your motives. Always be clear about your motives. If you want me to give to the American Cancer Society, or if you're going to talk about baseball and want me to support the baseball team, be clear about your motives. It doesn't mean you're not an expert if you're a baseball player, but be clear about your motives. Logos is appeals to logic or intellect. And I don't know if what follows is necessarily an appeal, but I think it is an example of how logic works. If E is the most frequent letter, and you're making a cipher and turn every E in a message into Z, then Z is going to behave as E does. That's an appeal to logic. That's how the cryptanalysts used the logic. They did the frequency count. They did all of this stuff. So even though we're not appealing to the logic, she's certainly showing how the women who were seen as nothing but playthings had to be very, very logical. I think you as a writers and researchers need to look at your own beliefs to make sure you understand why this set of facts seems compelling. I think you need to determine whether you know enough to write the paper. I think you need to avoid the temptation, especially this past 8 or 10 years, to just repeat what people you agree with say. I think you have to check the facts, especially when the facts come from people you agree with. And again, most people claim facts still matter. But again, I'm going to tell you, facts shouldn't speak for themselves. And things that are called facts, and I'm doing a little scare quotes here, should be things that you can verify, things that you can double check, and things that come from reputable sources. I want to come back to, I mentioned the premise of this before, but confirmation bias. I think everybody has this tendency to accept information that supports our beliefs and reject information that opposes them. It's something that you as a researcher and you as a writer need to fight throughout every paper you write. If it doesn't support your beliefs, A, are there reasons it's wrong? And if not, then why do you want to reject it? What is it in you that makes you want to reject it? I think fighting against confirmation bias is one of the most important things you as a student need to do. And it's one of the most important things I, as an instructor, need to do. Next, I think both statements on this page are important. We think we know a lot more than we actually do, or at least we have a tendency to think we know a lot more than we actually do. And I think it's important to understand that it's not what you don't know that will kill you. It's what you know that ain't really so that might get you in trouble. Make sure you check the ego at the door. Make sure you double check things that you think you know. And I think all of us just need to be a little more humble about our intellect. Finally, to wrap this up, pathos, logos, and ethos are an appeal to the emotions or the heart. They're an appeal to logic or the head, and they're an appeal to someone's credibility. If you take a look, I think that all of those things come from the Star Trek Enterprise. Spock was logical. McCoy was always trying to be credible, although he had a good deal of emotion as well. And Kirk was always working with the emotions, appealing to the emotions. I think it's important that you get all three. And again, I'm going to repeat this. This is from using emotional appeals makes logical claims stronger or more memorable. Have the balance. Find the spot where they all intersect. And I think this example might help. We're appealing to the knowledge, we're appealing to the logic that everybody knows Rosie the Riveter helped build bombs. It's less well known that women traveled to DC to lend their minds, their hard won educational efforts to the war. And the reason we don't know about it is that it was secret. But the fact is, I think there's a conclusion that the military and strategic importance was enormous. There's an emotional appeal, the Rosie the Riveter. We all know the famous poster. We all know about that. We're appealing to the fact that people in a college classroom might value intellect as much as they value the physical work. And I think it's important to understand that we're also seeing that there's a reason we haven't known about it. It was a secret. It was from the NSA. It helped form the NSA. All of those things are part of the secret. So I think this passage does try to get all three, the pathos, the ethos, and the logos together. And then finally, be aware of the rhetorical situation. Seize moments of opportunity as you're writing. Be timely as you're writing. Applicable, appropriate, and engaging for a particular audience. I think that's important as you're trying to write. We're going to wrap it up here. I hope that everyone has a good day. I hope to see everyone in class next class period. And if you have any questions, please ask.